Okay, so now I'm going to return to this poem that I was analyzing on Monday to talk in a little more detail about the meter, rhyme, and structure. And I'm going to be doing scansion for you, which, as I said, you need to know about sort of how to do it. And that's what I'm going to show you in this portion of the lesson. Okay, so as this is the poem, as you remember, Ars Poetica by Archibald MacLeish, and I have already done the work of identifying stressed and unstressed syllables. Okay, bear with me. Let me explain this to you. So, when you see an X, that means unstressed. I've put it above the lines. And when you see what do you call that? A slash, that's a stressed syllable. So let's look at that first line. A poem should be palpable and mute. If you just read that to yourself. A poem should be palpable and mute. Notice that you stress certain syllables more than other syllables. And that's what you want to notice. A poem should be palpable and mute. So, a poem should be palpable and mute. This is the classic English form, iambic pentameter. Remember, an iambic is the classic English thing. One unstressed syllable followed by one stressed syllable. This is one iambic foot. Here's a second iambic foot. Here's a third, a fourth, and a fifth. So this is, I'll write it for you, iambic pentameter. Actually, let me do this more cleanly. Okay, so that's the classic thing. But of course, this poem is not all written in iambic pentameter. It changes. I notice this line, as a globed fruit. Poem should be palpable and mute as a globed fruit. Globed fruit, that's where the stress is in that line. As a is not stressed. So this is more unusual. Don't worry about what we call that, just notice what it is. Dumb. There's definitely stress on dumb. Dumb as old medallions to the thumb. Let's look at this. We have iambic again, one unstressed, one stress, as old medallions to the thumb. But here there are 4 iambs. So this is called iambic tetrameter. That means 4. Okay. Let's keep going. Silent as the sleeve-worn stone. Okay, this line has a lot of stresses, and it starts with a stress. That's a little different. Of casement ledges where the moss has grown. How many stresses do we have? 5. So we're back to iambic pentameter. Okay, so what do we notice, first of all? What I've noticed in these first 3 couplets is that we have one line that is iambic, whether it's iambic pentameter, iambic tetrameter, or iambic pentameter again, and then we have another irregular line. That is a new discovery. So, I'm just going to put a comment in here. One line in each couplet is iambic, and the other is irregular. It's somehow different. And remember we said when things are irregular, that's what we notice those, because that's important. This is almost iambic, but notice a poem should be wordless. Wordless. We end on an unstressed syllable, which is a little bit unusual, but it's iambic up until that point, and then we end with this half put, an unstressed syllable. As the flight of birds, again, our irregular line. A poem should be motionless in time. Again, same pattern. This is iambic pentameter. Pentameter. As the moon climbs, this is again irregular. It's slightly similar to this, but not quite. But it does start with a stressed. Let's see what happens here. Leaving as the moon releases, twig by twig, the night entangled trees. So now neither of these lines are iambic, right? Because an iambic line starts with an unstressed syllable, and that's not the case here. So maybe, does that mean this couplet is important? Possibly. I don't know. Think about it. Okay. So let's keep going. Leaving as the moon behind the winter leaves, memory by memory the mind. Again, we're staying here with these stresses at the start of the line. These are called trochaic. You don't need to know that word, but notice that the stress is at the start of the line. Again, for the second stanza, for the second couplet in a row. Leaving as the moon behind the winter leaves, memory by memory the mind. And this line, notice this is really different. Memory by memory the mind. There's a lot of unstressed syllables next to each other. That's unusual. Even within this poem, usually it's, stressed, unstressed, or unstressed, stressed. But now here we have stress, unstress, unstress, stress, unstress, unstress. That has a really different effect. Leaving as the moon behind the winter leaves, that kind of rolls along. Memory by memory, the mind. Slows down a little bit. So what's the effect of that? Well, one thing I noticed earlier in my earlier reading is that the word mind was a bit unusual here because we had all this nature imagery and then all of a sudden the mind was brought into it. And this really dramatic change of rhythm sort of says again that this line is important. So we would want to come back to that line and think about what is the importance of that line. Okay, a poem should be motionless in time. Oh, back to iambic pentameter. It's kind of a relief. It feels very normal. A poem should be motionless in time. It has this rolling sing-song quality as the moon climbs. This, of course, is a repetition of the earlier couplet. Right here, same thing. Why is that repeated? Not sure. Okay. A poem should be equal to iambic tetrameter, so it's pretty regular. Not true. 2 stresses. So that definitely means that's important. It's very stressed. And we know, given the theme of the poem, that is important. Maybe that is the theme of the poem. A poem should be equal to, not true. That's a really important idea. For all the history of grief, iambic tetrameter, an empty doorway and a maple leaf, iambic pentameter. Okay, so this is all iambic. Both lines iambic. That's actually, that is a new thing in this poem, that both lines of a couplet would be iambic. Let's look at the next one. For love, the leaning grasses and the two lights above the sea. This is iambic, this is iambic. But here, how many stresses do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6. So that's a new thing. That's the longest line we have in the poem. But it's all iambic. And I wonder if that iambic, remember, is the sort of traditional meter in English. I wonder if this is kind of traditional poetry here. These two lines are sort of an example of traditional poetry, unlike other parts of the poem. It's a thought I have. Let's see. Okay. And then the last line, a poem should not mean, but be. And this is similar. Remember, but be, stress. That's obviously important, and it's very similar to this one. A poem should be equal to, not true. A poem should not mean, but be. It has the same rhythm. Okay, so what do we do with all this analysis? What does all this add up to? That is the hard part now. But you want to think about what the effect is. For me, what I see is that there's a play. By doing this, what I learn is that there is a play between traditional form, iambic form, and other things, and a lot of other things. It's not just a few breaks. There's a lot of other plays with form. However, the iambic comes back a lot. So it's something between traditional and non-traditional. And it's like, and the way that they're couplets, there's two lines in each, and it's often one line of traditional, one line of non-traditional. It's as if there's that dichotomy is important. Traditional on one side, non-traditional on the other. We have two opposing forces in each of these couplets. So that's an interesting, important idea, which illuminates something about the meaning of the poem, the theme of the poem. That it's not about that it's partly traditional, and there's some sort of struggle between tradition and not tradition. Another thing is just noticing where the stresses are. You know, this tells us that this is important. We know that already by reading it, but this really enforces it for us. Not true, or but be. These are just really key words. And then this is important in a different way. Memory by memory, the mind. There's no other line in the poem that has this kind of meter. So what is the significance of that? I don't know really, but to me it says that there's a whole other kind of language to think about. That the poem isn't addressing very much, but there's this world of the mind that's something a little bit different that the poem just suggests but doesn't talk about very much. So I hope this helps. I know it's a little hard now. You need to take a leap from this kind of analysis to writing an essay about this. But I hope this helps you explore a little bit, and I'm going to give you a chance in the discussion for Wednesday to explore this a little further with the poem. Okay, thank you all, and if this is totally confusing to you, just get in touch and I'll try to answer any specific questions you might have. Take care, everybody. Bye.